Yeah, like I said, the Elemist may functionally be a god, but as the real god, if there is one can attest, I have absolutely no qualms throwing down with omnipotent beings. So let's do it! What is up with this book being called The Strangler? At no point does anybody strangle anybody else to the best of my recollection. Huh. Okay. Egg on my face. It's the stranger, apparently, which makes way more sense. And it does explain why I called it that at the end of my last video. Now this has less to do with this book and more to do with the last, but I noticed that at no point did anyone suggest locking Tom up for 3 days, which I totally called back in my critique of The Capture. And like I said then, there are tons of reasons why it's not a great idea, but it would still be nice to know that somebody at least considered it. And maybe they did, between books, but I didn't read that. And this whole things being explained off-camera thing happens a lot moving forward in this series, so just remember that I mentioned it now. Right, so I just remembered why I bother wasting precious time covering superfluous opening chapters in the synopses, so that I can shit all over them in the critique. Now that whole justice for elephants thing, I'm not even going to bother pointing out the whole it's a lovely sentiment but the needs of the many argument, because at this point Rachel clearly just doesn't care. But I will ask this, what the hell were Carlisle and Rachel's sisters doing while Cassie and Rachel were off playing reverse ivory poacher? Were they just waiting in the car? Did the girl sneak out a bathroom window? And actually, I lied before, because I do have to point out that Joseph could very easily have been a controller, and perhaps even was, just one smart enough to not immediately out himself the moment an animal talks in his brain. Now, what if he had seen Cassie skulking around? How would that scene have played out differently? Would Rachel have just up and murdered the guy if the first thing he'd said was, "And a light"? I mean, did she even consider that that's what she would have to do in that event? No. No. A resounding no. And I don't approve. Oh, and I should also probably point out that renowned hippie Cassie was the one that was on the fence about that whole operation. Just an update on the timeline, Rachel mentions pretty early on that Jake had just been through the terrible ordeal of being infested by a yerk, and that Marco had held off on sharing his exciting yerk pool news so that Jake had time to, rest and recuperate, which suggests to me that this book probably took place about 2 weeks after the events of the capture, which puts the total duration of the series up to this point at, yeah, I don't know. I'll figure it out later. There are also a few hints as to the space line, the mysterious locale where all of this is supposedly taking place. Rachel says that her dad is moving 1,000 miles away to a huge sports town with serious mountains, where world-renowned Karla Belnikov trains gymnasts. I mean, could mean something. But seeing as how 1,000 miles away is likely figurative, and Wikipedia's never even heard of world-renowned Coach Belnikov, yeah, like I said, I'll figure it out later. It is kind of interesting that back in the last Rachel book, I compared the plight of poor Melissa Chapman to that of a child whose parents are going through a messy divorce. And the entire B-plot of this book centers around the complicated family situations that divorce can bring to bear, no pun intended. So I guess divorce is just Rachel's thing now? Stay tuned for the reaction when Mom brings home her new boyfriend and the Underground, where Carlisle and Antigone get to argue over who's going to buy Rachel her first car. I'm also a little bit confused by Rachel's specific choice to acquire a boar grizzly after specifically saying that she wanted power. Now I can understand skipping over those wussy black bears. Is that racist? Because, and I'm sorry internet, but Jim was wrong. Black bears are not the kind of bear that is best, not where power is concerned anyway, but neither are grizzlies. And while she didn't mention any Kodiaks being at the gardens, she does explicitly state that she's not interested in the polar bears, which suggests to me, at least, that the gardens has polar bears. I mean, maybe she knew ahead of time that all they had were sows. It's just a little moment, but when the gang is trying to explain to Axe what a noob he is, where the yerk pool is concerned, Rachel elegantly compares it to a not very nice place at all, and then proceeds to wonder out loud if the Andalites believe in the concepts of heaven and hell. Now, sadly, that is the last thing uttered in that chapter, but I actually would really have loved to have heard Axe's likely boring and overly technical response. Speaking of hell, what the hell is up with the whole in through the gap, out through the movie theater thing? I mean, I'm willing to indulge the notion that before this system was implemented, the Yerks took the time to control every employee of both of these fine establishments, even though they are historically idiots. And I can accept that your average Gap shopper probably isn't going to notice what's going on in a changing room that they're not actively using. I mean, why would they? But let's break this down. 1. A Yerk in need of a fix can go to the Gap at the mall and enter the Yerk pool through a door hidden behind the mirror in the last changing room. 2. The controller is down in the Yerk pool for some amount of time. And 3, the controller exits through some unknown passage at the cinema. So what's happening here? Do the controllers just walk into the changing room without clothing into which to change? Or do they bring clothes with them? If so, what happens to those clothes? Do they bring them down into the Yeerk pool with them, or do they just leave them there and wait for the controlled Gap employees to remove them? What happens if, say, the Gap has a huge sale on, I don't know, corsetry? Yeah, I've never shopped at the Gap. And there are enough customers that every changing room is needed. I mean, sure, your average shopper probably isn't going to think to try and open the mirror, but what if there's a line for the changing rooms, and a controller goes into one and then just never comes out? I guess they'd probably just go into the next available changing room and forget about it, but what if there's a long line? Maybe somebody notices that someone's been in that stall for a really long time. Even then, I guess they probably wouldn't think too hard about it, but isn't it reasonable to assume that the Yeerks are locking the door when they go in there? Maybe they don't, because they know why they're there, but what if they do? Who unlocks it after they've exited? And what about the universal method for determining stall occupancy? What if some rando checks for feet and sees someone open the mirror, or, God forbid, acts as Andalite hooves, or a baby-sized cockroach monster? I'm aware that some closeries have, like, doorkeepers for their changing rooms, and that would certainly be a wise move for the Yeerks in this case. But if they do, Rachel certainly never mentioned it, which, combined with the complete incompetence that the Yeerks have demonstrated so many times before now, strongly suggests that they don't. But what about the Animorphs? I mean, assuming the Yeerks have complete control of the business, wouldn't you think that they keep a pretty close eye on those changing rooms? So how come nobody thought it was weird when 2 teenage girls went into a changing room, and then 2 teenage boys went into the same changing room, and then another teenage boy went into that same changing room, left with a totally not suspicious bag full of clothes, and then came back and went into the same changing room again without a single person ever leaving except for Jake that one time? Well, I guess that's further evidence that there's no doorkeeper. Now, I've never worked at a clothier before, but I would think that even employees that aren't pod people are probably trained to prevent sexy shenanigans in the changing rooms, especially potentially underage sexy shenanigans, but maybe I'm wrong. But wait, even if I am, why do the controllers have to enter through the Gap and leave through the movie theater? Wouldn't it make more sense for them to just enter and leave through the Gap? That way, when they come out, if anyone's waiting for a changing room, they can just say, hey, I don't know, I had diarrhea or something, and that's why it took so long. For that matter, isn't the whole point here that the Yeerk pool is massive and has numerous entrances and exits? Why would Tobias and Marco report the Gap to multiplex connection with such confidence? I mean, clearly they observed enough controllers going into the Gap and then coming out of the movie theater, but why would they even think to observe that? I get following the known controllers into the Gap, but why, and more importantly, how, would they even think to check the cinema for outgoers? I guess maybe the controllers just really want to be close to their cars. But wait, then why wouldn't they just enter and leave through the movie theater? I mean, it would make sense if the Yeerks didn't have complete control of the theater, but we already established that that wouldn't really make sense. And wait, no, it wouldn't, because wouldn't it be just as weird for a bunch of non-employees to pop out of a janitor's closet or staff-only section on a daily basis as it would be for them to be walking into one? So no, they must have complete control, right? Okay, so the Yeerks' plan is stupid, but I guess I can accept that it worked well enough for the 2 or 3 weeks leading up to this story. Though I'm guessing it falls apart pretty quickly before the next book because all the things I just said. So, let's talk about how immensely boneheaded the Animorphs' plan is. First off, even going into someplace as dangerous as the Yeerk pool with so little to go on is a pretty damn stupid plan. But, you know, no risk, no reward. And let's face it, the book would have been pretty boring if it was just weeks of following controllers around, so I'll look past that for the moment. Having said that, it sure is convenient that the Gap has unisex changing rooms. Can't really fault them for that, because I'm pretty sure that that's true. Yeah, I've never shopped at the Gap. But it would be pretty risky to assume that the 5 of them could enter a single changing room in the span of a few minutes at a business that they didn't have reason to believe was entirely under the control of their insidious nemesis, let alone one that they did. But, you know, they had to get in there somehow, right? Whatever. I'm even willing to accept that the mirror probably has some sort of lock or trick to it that only controllers know, because Marco couldn't figure it out, because surely he checked it ahead of time, right? Bearing all that in mind, was this seriously plan A? Because I can think of several minor changes just right off the top of my head that would have made it way less dumb. I mean, what were the plans that they turned down in favor of this one? Do we just, like, storm in there as a pack of wolves? I mean, nobody's gonna mess with that, right? How many trench coats do we have between us? Or wait, does anyone have, like, one of those, like the 2-person horse costumes?
If we built this large wooden badger...
Plus, Gap employees / Yeerk incompetence aside, what if some random customer just wandered into their stall? I mean, they were obviously leaving it unlocked. I feel like even a dumb customer would find the piles of discarded clothing a little odd. And while they might not report it to staff, the fact remains that they could, and that, at the very least, would slow the whole operation down. I guess maybe the others were just watching the stall really close to make sure that they timed it right, but I feel like that would draw attention. Oh, right, Gap employees / Yeerk incompetence aside. But seriously, why are they morphing roaches in the first place? I mean, I know they needed something small, but why not morph flies? They're smaller, faster, incredible reflexes, they all already have that morph. I mean, I guess the idea was that cockroaches can hear better, but not only do I not buy that, I mean, especially if the flies were to, I don't know, land on something. But I feel like the vastly superior speed and maneuverability would have far outweighed the slim chance that they might be in the right place to maybe hear a random controller possibly mention something he or she has absolutely no reason to mention a little better. Wait, if the plan was for Jake to go in there with a bag anyway, why didn't everyone just morph ahead of time and ride in the bag? Or like the hood of a sweatshirt or something. Okay, maybe there's no good place to morph in or around the mall, but even as recently as The Predator, Jake, Marco, and Axe's excellent mall adventure allowed 45 minutes to morph, ride the bus, and get to the mall. That would still leave them an hour 15, or maybe an hour after whatever human does the carrying gets to the next to last stall and morphs. Then again, wasn't it literally a book ago when Five Flies caught a ride on Red Tail Airlines to the Yerk Hospital? Why not try that again? I mean, I know they had a little bit of difficulty finding their way inside, but they could still use the one person with a bag strategy to actually get into the mall. How do they find the bag? I don't know. Put some food in there or a dog turd. Do I have to figure everything out? Hell, now that I think of it, why even take the chance of one of them falling off of Tobias on the way when all but one of them could just bird of prey onto the roof, demorph, remorph, and then the flies could just... No. You know, on second thought, I'm not going to take this one away from Tobias. It's nice to feel needed. You know, hypothetically. Since they didn't go with any of those less stupid ideas, I'm forced to accept that this plan, for all of its flaws, worked. The Yerks very recently gained control of both a Gap and a movie theater, used them to install a non-sustainable in-through-one out-through-the-other system, just in time for the Animorphs to find the time to track down that very entrance and exit, before the Yerks could realize how non-sustainable it was or how to properly manage it, thus allowing 5 teenagers with a crippling inability to think things through to slip in unnoticed. I feel like I've probably ranted enough about that. So I will just say this. I've said it before. I will inevitably say it again. But if there is not a goddamn plot point at a later date that some external force is giving them impeccable luck... Oh, so yeah. Let's talk about that. First of all, I had no idea how the Animorphs were going to get out of that whole space centipede, amuse-bouche situation. And that was even though I knew that the Elemist premiered in this book. Oh, and then the Elemist doesn't even save them. Speaking of that Elemist... Well, despite what I said earlier, I actually have no major gripes with the way the Elemist is portrayed here. It's more just a general disdain for elements like the Elemist, or the Q Continuum, or Tom Bombadil, God, whatever you want to call him, regardless of whether or not they have their own Deus Ex Machinations. The fact that these entities exist in their respective canons inevitably sucks some of the drama out of it for me. Because even if they have their own reasons for not fixing any given problem, the fact that they could means that anything that happens could be their doing behind the scenes, and that ultimately means that the characters that we're supposed to care about have no real control over their own destinies. And even though I know that that's something we all fear deep down, I still don't like fucking thinking about it. While we're on the subject, I do feel like I should point out that the Elemist self described the Animorphs as, quote, the only humans aware of the invasion, unquote. Which simultaneously pisses me off and makes me angry, because not only is it incredibly dismissive to the thousands of human beings walking around with Yerks in their heads, but it's also always kind of bothered me that the Animorphs just assume that the Yerk invasion is just a wherever they live problem. I mean, why would the Yerks only land in one nowhere town in the US instead of, I don't know, various strategic locations around the globe? And again, I guess, hope that the Elemist could have been lying. For that matter, am I just supposed to assume from now on that any time that the Animorphs get too lucky that the Elemist loaded the dice? Well, that's too bad, because I'm not going to. But yeah, back to that narrow escape. I know it was a crowded dining hall filled with human controllers, and every surface of their respective persons was covered in taxon giblets. But I don't care how much slime you have on you, or how dumb the Yerks are, somebody must have been able to distinguish a fucking centaur from 4 greasy children. Sure, they probably couldn't pick their faces out of a lineup, but come the fuck on. Huh. Well, I guess that explains that. Rachel actually does refer to her grizzly morph as the largest carnivore on land right about this time, so it stands to reason that she actually does believe grizzlies are larger and more powerful than polar bears. I mean, she's still wrong, but... Immediately after Rachel is wrong about grizzly girth, the team escapes up the drop shaft, while dozens of controllers trying to stop them just forget how to use a drop shaft. I mean, be fair, their options were follow Raging Fur Monster up elevator or stay and try the French dip, so I guess I don't really blame any of them. On the other hand, when they reach the top of the drop shaft, fully human, axe notwithstanding, they find 2 guards standing guard, and they knock them unconscious. This seems to happen a lot. Too often, in fact. And while I'm willing to accept that they maybe got the drop on these guys, and that Axe was fully Andalite when it happened at the hospital in the last book, and so on, every single time that somebody gets a good look at them, or should have, I have to wonder when the time will come that they just have to straight up murder somebody. Because not only is knocking someone unconscious just, like, super bad for them, but it also doesn't automatically erase their memory. This isn't fucking Gilligan's Island. On the lighter side of things, the first thing that Marco says when they arrive in the charred out remains of the school in the maybe but not definitely future is, "Normally, I'm all for seeing the school blown up." Simpler times. Just to be clear, I'm not reminiscing about the good old days of schools exploding. I'm reminiscing about a time in which someone could still make a joke in which a school exploded without it reminding everyone of, I don't know, the fucking news. Then Marco makes a Back to the Future 2 reference back when a section of that movie was still set in the future. Simpler times. Just to be clear, Back to the Future 2 is still my favorite. Huh. That's weird. So, they're in the future. Axe explains to them that the future tube monorail thing is moving at 300 or more of your miles per hour, to which Marco cunningly observes, "They're everyone's miles, Axe. You're on Earth. We all have the same miles." Axe, in a rare and possibly his first ever attempt at snideness, replies, "What about nations that use kilometers?" Now, I love reading these middle schoolers' attempt at witty banter, especially where Axe is involved, but a mile is still a mile. Nobody in France or Japan or Burma or Liberia is calling a mile a kilometer or vice versa. So Marco is absolutely correct, and Axe just sounds like an idiot. Which, now that I think about it, makes perfect sense. But I can't be the only one who read this and thought that Applegate herself was trying to sound clever. Or maybe she realized that it made no sense and was being clever. Like Kessel Run in 12 parsecs clever. I have to bring it up. It may be the first time, but I can't say for sure because I'm too busy lazy to go back and watch my old videos. The very last thing that Rachel says in the chapter before everyone heads off to the EGS tower is, "We kick yerk butt." Now, I am not an expert on children, nor am I an expert on the etymology of curse words, but I did experience middle school in the 90s, and there was no goddamn way she would say butt in this situation. Cassie might, but a stone-cold, battle-hardened bad butt like Rachel absolutely would not. Now, this is still a book that was aimed at slightly younger than middle school-age children, so I'm not advocating that they let fly with the fucks and the shits anytime someone stubs a toe. But it's not even an A-list curse word, and they're talking about walking into a massacre. And if B.A.S.E can say damn in Mega Man 7 in 1995, then Rachel can say ass in Animorphs 7 in 1997. Speaking of the EGS Tower, their arrival brings me to another ongoing issue that I have. While they're formulating their plan outside, phrases like, most of them, the people that work in the EGS Tower, are probably just normal people, or the guard is probably just a normal guy, are bandied about. Now, they may very well have been right in this particular case, though make no mistake, there is no evidence of it. But these kids just really love making convenient assumptions when it comes to things like this, even though we, as the readers, have no reason to believe that they have anything to support it other than, well, it's what they want to be true. And of course, somehow it always proves to be true. I mean, this probably isn't the best example, but trust me, the assumptions just get so much more ridiculous from here on out. I probably could have waited. Yeah, just forget I said anything. It does strike me as a little odd that their plan was to start at the bottom of the tower. I mean, I'm no architect, but I'm pretty sure that most skyscrapers have rooftop access. Admittedly, when Tobias was Tobiasing around up there, he made a comment about how he couldn't see anything through the windows and certainly didn't mention an entrance, but still. I mean, everyone in this army can fly. The Pop-O-Matic Dome, that I'm just now realizing I forgot to mention sat atop the EGS Tower in the future, certainly suggests that the Kandrona is probably somewhere near the top. And plus, there aren't a dozen enemy units flying around up there. It'd just be nice if somebody pitched, hey, wouldn't it be easier if we entered through the roof? I mean, even if the door up there was locked, it's not like that proved a hindrance for any other door in the building. Just think, damn it. That's all I ask. Oh, and then of course it turns out that the guard is a controller. Gasp. On the subject of that gratuitous elevator trip, the kids make small talk to, pass the time, and Rachel makes some comment about how she wants to go see that new Keanu Reeves movie. Now, considering when this book came out, when the series started, the upcoming presidential election that was mentioned in the last book, the fact that Speed came out in the middle of 1994, I can only assume that the movie she's talking about is Johnny Mnemonic. Holy shit, did K.A. just slip in a gay culture reference? Lots of guys wouldn't want to date a grizzly bear. Don't worry, Rachel. There are lots of guys out there who want to date bears. Though I guess it could also be a furry culture reference. Sorry, back to the EGS Tower. A thought occurs. I feel like a Hork-Bajir morph would be really handy for every Animorph Tobias notwithstanding to have in their catalog. Sure would be nice if there was a pile of them lying around incapacitated at some point. Sadly, I don't think that's ever happened in the series. Certainly not in this book. What the fuck? Yeah, it didn't even occur to them. And that seems like as good a place to wrap up as any. Any architects or architecture enthusiasts or construction workers or, I don't know, base jumpers out there that can clear up the whole rooftop access thing. Maybe you have a 13 or 14-year-old with a potty mouth. Maybe you're just a Gap employee who wants to tell me to go kill myself. I always appreciate feedback, and you know where the comments section is. Whether you are a returning viewer or this is your first exposure to my particular brand of nonsense, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell all of your friends, enemies, and random passersby on the street. And keep an eye out for my mega-sized next episode about, you guessed it, Megamorphs number 1, The Andalite's Gift. It may take a little bit longer than usual, but you will see me then.